Not every song on the radio in the 60s and 70s was innocent fun. Tucked between the love songs and the dance hits were some genuinely dark, unsettling tracks that stuck with kids long after the station moved on to the next song. So today, we're counting down 10 nasty songs that traumatized every kid who grew up in the 60s and 70s. Number 10, Tell Laura I Love Her by Ray Peterson. Released in 1960, this song was written by Jeff Barry and Ben Raleigh and told the story of a young man named Tommy who enters a dangerous stock car race hoping to win enough prize money to buy his girlfriend Laura a wedding ring. The song follows Tommy through the crash that kills him, ending with his dying words asking that Laura be told of his love, delivered in graphic enough detail to unsettle plenty of young listeners hearing it for the first time. It reached number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100, but many American radio stations refused to play it, worried the dramatic death scene might encourage reckless behavior among impressionable teenagers. In the United Kingdom, the reaction was even stronger. Decca Records initially destroyed roughly 25,000 pressed copies rather than release Peterson's version, calling it too tasteless for British audiences. A cover version by Welsh singer Ricky Valance was released instead, and even though the BBC banned it as well, citing concerns about copycat behavior following a string of real fatal accidents, it still climbed to number 1 on the UK singles chart. For kids growing up on AM radio, the song became one of the earliest examples of a genre soon known as teenage tragedy songs, delivering a genuinely frightening death scene wrapped inside a catchy 3-minute pop melody. Peterson's original recording sold well despite the resistance from broadcasters, eventually surpassing 7 million copies worldwide once Valance's UK version and later re-releases were factored in, making it one of the best-selling singles of the entire teenage tragedy genre. The controversy surrounding the song's release only seemed to deepen its mystique among younger listeners, many of whom sought it out specifically because they had heard it was considered too dark or dangerous for regular radio play. Peterson, who had survived childhood polio and possessed an unusually wide 4-octave vocal range, went on to record other hits later in his career, but none matched the cultural impact of this one dramatic, controversial single from the very start of the decade. Even the song's writers found themselves somewhat surprised by the intensity of the backlash, given that stock car racing itself was a genuinely popular and rapidly growing sport across America at the time, meaning the fictional tragedy at the heart of the song felt uncomfortably plausible to listeners who followed real racing news regularly. Number 9, Riders on the Storm by The Doors. Riders on the Storm. Released in June 1971, this song was one of the final tracks recorded by The Doors before lead singer Jim Morrison's death in Paris just weeks later, and it opens with the sound of a genuine thunderstorm layered underneath the music, an unusual and eerie production choice for a mainstream rock single. The lyrics describe a killer loose on the highway, details reportedly drawn partly from the real case of spree killer Billy Cook, who murdered several people including a family while hitchhiking across the American Southwest in the early 1950s. The song reached number 14 on the Billboard Hot 100 that year, becoming one of the band's final hits during Morrison's lifetime. And its slow, hypnotic pace combined with the storm sound effects gave the whole recording an unsettling, almost dreamlike quality. For kids who grew up hearing it late at night on the radio, the combination of thunder, Morrison's low, drawn-out vocal delivery, and the song's ambiguous warning about hitchhikers created a genuinely eerie listening experience that stood apart from most other rock songs of the era. The timing of its release arriving so close to Morrison's own sudden death only added to the unsettling reputation the song developed among listeners in the years that followed. Morrison reportedly recorded his vocals for the track in a hushed, almost whispered tone, a deliberate creative choice that added to the song's unsettling, hypnotic atmosphere rather than any indication of illness, though it later became one of many small details fans pointed to when looking back at his final recorded work. The album it appeared on, A Woman, was recorded under unusually loose conditions, with the band setting up in their own rehearsal space rather than a traditional studio, giving the entire session, and this song in particular, a raw, unpolished quality that only added to its eerie, unfinished feeling. Keyboardist Ray Manzarek later said the thunderstorm sound effects were added almost as an afterthought during mixing, a decision that ended up defining the song's atmosphere far more than anyone involved initially expected, turning what began as a fairly simple blues-influenced arrangement into one of the band's most haunting and instantly recognizable recordings.
Riders on the storm.
Number 8. Leader of the Pack by the Shangri-Las.
That's why I fell for the leader of the pack.
Released in 1964, this song was written by George Shadow Morton, Ellie Greenwich, and Jeff Barry, and told the story of a teenage girl whose parents forbid her from seeing her motorcycle-riding boyfriend. After she reluctantly breaks up with him under pressure from her family, he speeds off on his motorcycle in frustration and is killed in a crash, all captured through sound effects of revving engines, screeching tires, and a jarring sudden silence that many young listeners found genuinely frightening the first time they heard it. The song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 that November, becoming one of the biggest hits of the girl group era despite, or perhaps partly because of, its dramatic and unsettling ending. Some radio stations expressed concern that the record glamorized motorcycle culture and reckless driving among teenagers, though it never faced the same level of formal bans that some earlier teenage tragedy songs had encountered.
One day my dad said to find someone new.
The realistic, layered sound effects were considered groundbreaking production work for the time, giving the crash scene an intensity that went well beyond what most pop records attempted. For kids who grew up with the song playing on car radios and jukeboxes, that sudden crash sound became one of the most viscerally unsettling moments in all of 1960s pop music. The recording famously required dozens of overdubbed sound effects, including motorcycle engine recordings and breaking glass, layered together by producer George Shadow Morton in a level of studio detail unusual for a girl group single of that era. The song later inspired a well-known parody, Leader of the Laundromat, by a group called The Detergents, which softened the tragic ending into a comedic domestic mishap, a sign of just how widely recognized, and by some measures overexposed, the original's dramatic formula had become within the pop culture of the mid-1960s. The Shangri-Las themselves, a group of teenage girls from Queens, New York, became closely associated with this kind of dramatic storytelling throughout their brief but influential career, and this song in particular remained a staple of their live performances for as long as the group continued touring together.
That's why I fell for the leader of the pack.
Number 7. The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia by Vicki Lawrence.
That's the night that the lights went out in Georgia.
Released in 1972 and written by her husband at the time, Bobby Russell, this song told the story of a small-town murder trial in which a man is wrongly hanged for a killing that was actually committed by his own sister, who confesses the truth only in the song's final lines. The song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 that spring, becoming a massive and unexpected hit for Lawrence, who was primarily known at the time as a cast member on The Carol Burnett Show, rather than as a recording artist. The plot's dark twist involving a wrongful execution and a family member's hidden guilt unsettled plenty of young listeners who hadn't expected such a grim storyline packed into a catchy, radio-friendly country pop song. Because Lawrence delivered the confession in the song's final verse so matter-of-factly, almost as an afterthought rather than a dramatic reveal, the effect on listeners was often described as more chilling than if the twist had been delivered with obvious dramatic emphasis. The song went on to win Lawrence a Grammy Award for Best Female Pop Vocal Performance the following year, cementing its status as one of the most successful and unsettling story songs of the entire decade. Lawrence has said in the later interviews that she was initially reluctant to record such a dark, narrative-heavy song, uncertain whether audiences who knew her primarily for comedy would take a murder ballad seriously coming from her. That uncertainty proved unfounded, as the song's massive success introduced an entirely new side of her career to the public and remained closely associated with her name for the rest of her life, even as she continued working steadily in television comedy throughout the years that followed. The song's country pop arrangement, layered with strings and a driving rhythm section, helped it cross over successfully between country, pop, and adult contemporary radio formats simultaneously, a rare achievement that widened its audience considerably beyond what a typical story song of that era might have reached on its own. Number 6. Ode to Billie Joe by Bobby Gentry.
Billie Joe McAllister jumped off the Tallahatchie.
Released in 1967, this song told the story of a rural Mississippi family discussing everyday news over dinner, only for the conversation to reveal that a local boy named Billie Joe McAllister has died by suicide, jumping off the Tallahatchie Bridge. The song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 that August, and became one of the most talked about singles of the year, largely because of what it deliberately left unexplained. Gentry never clarified in the lyrics exactly what the narrator and Billie Joe had been seen throwing off the bridge earlier that year, a mystery that captivated and unsettled listeners in roughly equal measure as they tried to piece together what might have happened. The family's flat, indifferent reaction to hearing about the boy's death, casually continuing their meal and conversation without much visible emotion, struck many young listeners as genuinely disturbing, perhaps even more than the suicide itself. For kids growing up with the song on the radio, the calm, matter-of-fact tone used to describe something so dark became one of the most quietly unsettling moments in all of 1960s pop music, precisely because nothing about the delivery matched the seriousness of what was actually being described. Gentry has said in the later interviews that she deliberately left the mystery of what was thrown off the bridge unresolved, more interested in exploring the family's emotional detachment than in solving any particular puzzle for her listeners. That choice fueled decades of speculation and fan theories, and the song was eventually adapted into a 1976 feature film that offered its own explanation, though Gentry herself never fully endorsed any single interpretation as the definitive answer. The song also earned Gentry 3 Grammy Awards, including Best New Artist, and its success helped launch a recording career that continued for years afterward, though nothing else she released ever generated quite the same level of public fascination or unease as this one mysterious, quietly devastating story song.
Billie Joe McAllister jumped off the Tallahatchie.
Number 5. In the Year 2525 by Zager and Evans.
In the year 2525.
Released in 1969, this song imagined a series of increasingly bleak future centuries for humanity, describing a world where people gradually lose control over their own bodies, thoughts, and eventually their existence entirely, ending on an ambiguous note about whether humanity survives into the distant future at all. Written and performed by Denny Zager and Rick Evans, the song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 6 weeks that summer, becoming one of the most successful one-hit wonders in chart history. Its slow, deliberate pacing and increasingly grim descriptions of a mechanized, dehumanized future left a strong impression on younger listeners who weren't necessarily prepared for that level of existential dread wrapped inside a catchy pop melody. The song's ambiguous, unresolved ending, offering no clear answer about humanity's ultimate fate, only added to the unsettling feeling many kids described after hearing it for the first time. Zager and Evans never had another major hit afterward, meaning this one unusually dark philosophical song became the sole lasting impression most listeners retained of either musician for the rest of their careers. The song had actually been written by Evans several years earlier, in 1964, before finally being recorded and released once the two musicians formed a partnership and self-financed the original single through a small Nebraska-based label. Its unusually bleak tone stood out sharply against the more upbeat, optimistic pop songs dominating radio that same summer, making its extended run at number 1 all the more surprising, given how little the song resembled a typical chart-topping hit of that era. The two musicians met while stationed together in the military and continued performing locally around Nebraska for years before finally recording the song, meaning their sudden and massive national success arrived only after a long, largely unnoticed period, working well outside the mainstream music industry entirely.
In the year 2525.
Number 4. One Tin Soldier by Coven.
One tin soldier rides away.
Originally written by Dennis Lambert and Brian Potter and first recorded by the Canadian group The Original Cast in 1969, this song told the allegorical story of a peaceful mountain kingdom attacked by a neighboring valley in search of hidden treasure, only for the attackers to discover, after killing the kingdom's people, that the treasure was nothing more than a stone inscribed with a message about peace. The song's mix of violence and moral irony left an impression on younger listeners who found the story's brutal logic more disturbing than a typical pop lyric. The version most people remember today was recorded by Coven lead singer Jinx Dawson for the 1971 independent film Billie Joe, reaching number 26 on the Billboard Hot 100 and becoming closely associated with the film's own violent, socially charged storyline. Coven re-recorded the song again in 1973, and it returned to the charts a third time that year, showing just how much staying power the story continued to have years after its original release. For kids who grew up hearing the song on the radio without necessarily understanding its anti-war message, the stark imagery of a massacre carried out for treasure that turned out to be worthless left a lasting, uneasy impression that stuck around long after the song stopped playing. Dawson had actually been the director's second choice for the film version, brought in only after Linda Ronstadt turned out to be unavailable to record it, though the credit still went to the full Coven lineup, even though Dawson was the only band member who actually performed on that particular recording. The song's connection to the socially charged, violent storyline of Billie Joe, a film centered on a half-Native American Vietnam veteran defending a school from local prejudice and abuse, only deepened its unsettling reputation among kids who saw the movie in theaters and heard the song reinforcing its themes of righteous, brutal conflict. The song returned to the Billboard chart no fewer than 3 separate times across the early 1970s, as the film found new audiences through repeated re-releases, an unusual pattern that helped keep its grim central image. A hidden treasure that turns out to be nothing but a message about peace after an entire village has already been slaughtered, in heavy rotation on the radio for years longer than most songs of its era.
One tin soldier rides away.
Number 3. Patches by Dickie Lee. Released in 1962, this song was written by Barry Mann and Larry Kolber and told the story of 2 teenagers from very different social backgrounds whose families forbid them from being together. Faced with that pressure, the girl in the story, nicknamed Patches, drowns herself in a river, and the song ends with the narrator vowing to join her in death by doing the same thing. That ending, delivered in a gentle waltz-time melody that gave no real warning of how dark the lyrics would turn, caught plenty of young listeners off guard the first time they really understood what the song was describing. Because of its suicide theme, a number of radio stations across the country refused to play it, worried about the message it might send to teenagers already dealing with heartbreak or family pressure of their own. Despite that pushback, the song still reached number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and sold more than 1 million copies, earning Dickie Lee a gold record for what became his signature hit. For kids who grew up hearing it on the radio without fully processing the lyrics until years later, the moment of realizing what the song was actually about often left a lasting impression long after the melody had faded from memory. The song had actually first been recorded by a different, lesser-known singer named Jimmy Isle 2 years earlier in 1960, but that version failed to gain any real traction, and it wasn't until Dickie Lee's rendition reached a much wider audience that the song's unsettling storyline became a genuine topic of conversation among younger listeners and concerned parents alike. Lee went on to record other, similarly dark story songs throughout the decade, but Patches remained the one most closely tied to his name. A song many kids first heard as a simple, pretty melody before slowly realizing just how bleak its actual ending really was. Songwriter Barry Mann went on to become one of the most successful and prolific writers of the Brill-building era, contributing to dozens of hits for other artists over the following decades, though this particular song remained one of the earliest and starkest examples of just how dark a mainstream pop lyric could get while still finding commercial success on the radio. Number 2, Last Kiss by J. Frank Wilson and the Cavaliers.
Well, where can my baby be?
Released in 1964, this song told the story of a young couple whose car crashes into a stalled vehicle on a dark, rainy road, with the singer waking to find his girlfriend has died in his arms. It was written and originally recorded by Georgia singer Wayne Cochran in 1961, who later claimed the song had been inspired by a real fatal crash that killed several teenagers near his home in Barnesville, Georgia, in December 1962. That timeline doesn't entirely hold up, since Cochran had actually written and released the song before that specific accident occurred, though he likely drew on the many crashes he witnessed along a dangerous stretch of highway near where he lived. J. Frank Wilson's cover version became the true commercial breakthrough, reaching number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and earning a gold record complete with graphic, vivid imagery describing the crash and its aftermath that unsettled plenty of young listeners tuning in on the radio. In a grim twist, the band's own manager, Sonley Roush, who had brought them the song in the first place, was killed in a real car accident on tour just months after the record became a hit. For kids who grew up hearing the song's detailed description of the crash, the combination of the lyrics and that real-life tragedy surrounding the band made the record feel unusually close to reality. Wilson himself was seriously injured in that same crash that killed Roush, adding an even darker layer to a song already built entirely around a fatal car accident, one that many young fans didn't learn about until years after the record had already become one of the era's most successful and unsettling hits. Early pressings of the single's cover art reportedly depicted Wilson kneeling over the girl with visible blood on her face before the image was quietly altered, a small but telling detail about just how far record labels were initially willing to go in marketing the song's grim subject matter. Cochran himself went on to a long career as a soul and R&B performer, known for his flamboyant stage presence, and he would occasionally address the song's disputed origin story in later interviews, acknowledging that the connection between the lyrics and the real Barnesville crash had been embellished somewhat once the song became a national hit for a different act entirely.
Well, where, oh, where can my baby be?
Number 1, Run Joey, Run by David Geddes. Released in the summer of 1975, this song was written by Paul Vance and Jack Perricone and told the story of a pregnant teenage girl named Julie who begs her boyfriend Joey to run for his life because her father, discovering the pregnancy, is coming after him with a gun. As Joey runs toward Julie instead of away, her father fires at him, but the shot strikes Julie instead, and the song ends with her dying in Joey's arms, still insisting they were going to get married. Vance, an established songwriter already known for hits like Catch a Falling Star, reportedly pulled Geddes directly out of law school to record the track, and even had his own young daughter provide the frantic, pleading voice heard in the recording's dramatic spoken sections. The song reached number 4 in the Billboard Hot 100 that October, becoming a surprise hit at a time when the melodramatic teenage tragedy genre had mostly faded from mainstream radio nearly a decade earlier. For kids who grew up hearing the desperate, screaming vocal performance and the sound of a gunshot integrated directly into a top 40 pop song, the combination proved to be one of the most genuinely unsettling listening experiences to hit mainstream radio in the entire decade, a strange and unexpected revival of a genre most assumed had already run its course. Geddes managed one more top 20 hit later that same year, with a similarly melodramatic song about a blind football fan, but neither that follow-up nor anything else in his catalog matched the sheer intensity or shock value of this one recording. Decades later, the song continues to appear regularly on lists ranking the most over-the-top or unintentionally alarming hits of the 1970s, a reputation that has followed it ever since, even as many of the kids who first heard it on the radio still remember exactly where they were the first time that gunshot interrupted the song. Vance had a long track record of spotting commercial potential in unlikely places, having previously written novelty and story-driven hits for other artists across multiple decades, and this final major success capped a career built largely on finding dramatic, attention-grabbing stories that translated surprisingly well into 3-minute pop singles. Looking back, it's remarkable just how much genuinely dark material made its way onto mainstream radio during those 2 decades, tucked right in between the love songs and the dance hits without much warning at all. From car crashes and murder trials to apocalyptic futures and A Stranger with a Gun, these songs proved that pop radio was never quite as innocent as it's sometimes remembered. If these unsettling classics brought back a memory or two, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into music history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.